My entire childhood was spent in the city of Toronto. I was born and raised a city rat, thoroughly comfortable and accustomed to the big city life. I lived in a downtown apartment with just my mom. She did an incredible job raising me and taking care of everything. I always knew being a single parent was hard, but it was especially tough for her. She worked 2 jobs and even took night shifts once a month. He came from a tiny farm community in western Alberta called Fallon, with barely 100 residents. Moving to Toronto, Ontario was a monumental step for her. The phrase I heard most often growing up was, "This is not how we used to do things in Fallon." She had to adjust to city life quickly. She had me when she was only 20 years old, which made everything even more challenging. Despite the difficulties, I learned to be self-sufficient and do my part. I often asked my mom why we didn't live in Fallon anymore if she missed it so much. It was always a touchy subject. When I was a teenager, determined to know more about her hometown, I asked again after one of her night shifts. That's when she finally told me her story about Fallon and why she didn't want me to grow up there. She described Fallon as a really small place where everyone had a farm and large families were necessary to manage the land. The road into town was shaped like a big horseshoe with the town hall at the bottom. The surrounding thick forest was full of wildlife and overgrowth. From the time she was born, it was known that on the night of a full moon, all the animals had to be locked away in the barn. Anything left outside wouldn't survive till morning. She recounted tales of a monster that haunted Fallon. The monster, according to local gossip, looked like a man but ran on all 4s, covered in dark, thick fur with the face of a wolf, a big mouth full of teeth, and angry animal eyes. Dave Sanders claimed his dad had chased the monster off their property, but my mom wasn't convinced. Everyone in Fallon adhered to a strict routine, ensuring their animals were safely locked away during full moons. But there was an incident that happened in the spring, around April or May, that changed everything. My mom was seeing my father, Mark, at the time. They had been together for a couple of years. His best friend was Philip Grant, and my mom's best friend was Emily Smithers. The 4 of them often spent time together. One night, during a full moon, something terrible happened. Emily and Philip were missing. Their screams echoed through the forest, drowned by the howls of the monster. My mom and Mark searched frantically, but all they found were bloody remains and tracks leading deeper into the woods. That night changed my mom forever. She fled Fallon, determined to give me a safer life, far from the horrors she endured. She never spoke of the monster again, but the terror in her eyes whenever the moon was full told me everything I needed to know. And so, I grew up in Toronto, safe from the darkness that lurked in Fallon, Alberta. I don't know all the details, but Philip was supposed to close up the barn to prepare for the monster. He didn't do it. Usually, the monster struck when a lone animal was left out or a couple had escaped. Our town was diligent about ensuring we didn't give the monster anything to take, but Philip messed up. The morning after a full moon, Simon Graham went to open the barn and found it wide open. Inside, it looked like a slaughterhouse. Everything was devoured, leaving only bones and blood. The entire town pitched in to help the Grants, even getting them more animals, but it was a devastating blow to their family. Philip was severely punished by his father. From that day forward, he made it his goal to kill the monster of Fallon. It consumed him. He spent his time drawing, plotting, and planning, trying to convince Mark to help him. I was obviously opposed, and this went on for months. Philip was a different person after that incident, possibly due to whatever his father did to him. Emily was very supportive of him despite her worries, and I couldn't blame her. It would have been nice to be free from the monster's terror. Philip's obsession culminated one night in June. It seemed he had moved on. He hadn't spoken about the monster in almost a week. Mark, Emily, and I hoped he had let it go. One Saturday night, there was a big community event at the town hall. Mark, Emily, Philip, and I made plans to attend. At the last minute, Mark couldn't make it, so I went with Emily. It was a full moon, and everyone made sure to be indoors before sunset. We hung out in Philip's living room, which faced the fields beyond the Grant household. Philip seemed normal at first but grew fidgety as it got darker. I had a bad feeling growing inside me. I asked him, "Philip, what's going on? Why do you keep looking outside?" Looking over his shoulder, I noticed something. A chicken from the Wells family, given to Philip's family, was outside, and the barn was locked. Then I saw it, a rifle leaning by the back door. He was trying to lure the monster. I pleaded with him not to do this, saying it was too dangerous. Emily looked shocked and quickly grew frightened. "Philip, it's a bad idea. I'm not going to let you do this. Don't tell me what to do. This is for the best. Think of all the good a single well-placed bullet can do," he snapped. I begged him not to do something stupid. I wished Mark was there to stop him. We sat silently, too afraid to defend him, but too loyal to say something. As he explained his reasoning, a horrible sound from outside sprung Philip into action. I looked out the window and felt my heart in my throat. The chicken ran frantically, making horrible sounds, as the monster came closer, illuminated by the porch light. It was covered in thick gray fur, with a head like a wolf or hunting dog, long pointed ears, a dog-like snout, large fangs, and piercing animal eyes. It was incredibly humanoid in appearance, covered in muscle, and on all fours, but definitely at least 7 feet tall standing. It moved closer to the chicken like a large jungle cat. The monster's eyes glowed with a malevolent intelligence as it stalked forward, its jaws opening in anticipation. Philip, rifle in hand, stepped outside. I wanted to scream, to stop him, but fear choked the words in my throat. The night air grew colder, filled with the scent of blood and fear. As the monster lunged at the chicken, Philip fired. The gunshot echoed through the night. The bullet hit the creature, but instead of falling, it howled in rage, its eyes locking onto Philip. It charged at him, faster than anything I had ever seen. Emily and I screamed, but it was too late. Philip tried to fire again, but the monster was on him, ripping the rifle from his hands and tearing into him with savage fury. His screams filled the night, mingling with the monster's roars. Blood splattered the ground, and within moments, Philip was gone, devoured by the beast. Emily and I fled, running to the town hall, our hearts pounding, tears streaming down our faces. We burst in, shouting for help. The townsfolk armed themselves and rushed to the Grant house. But by the time they arrived, the monster was gone, leaving behind only destruction and death. The town mourned Philip, but his death served as a grim reminder of the monster's power. From that night on, everyone in Fallon doubled their efforts to stay safe during full moons. The monster continued to haunt our nightmares, a constant presence in the dark corners of our minds, reminding us that some horrors can never be escaped. It wasn't funny at all. The only thing between the monster and Emily and me was the thin glass of the Grant's living room window. I watched in horrified fascination as it broke its hunting ritual, savagely pounced on the chicken, and devoured it within seconds. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out, and the monster's ears twitched. It took an aggressive stance, beginning to rise onto its hind legs. I saw Philip frantically reloading his gun after missing his first shot. I thought I was about to watch my friend die. But then, the monster did something unexpected. It turned and sprinted away on all fours. Philip yelled in anger, finishing reloading and running after the beast. I wish I could say I ran after him and stopped him, but I didn't. Emily and I sat in silence for a few moments before she broke down and started to cry. Moments later, we heard another distant gunshot, and our eyes shot to the window. Outside the small illuminated area from the porch light, there was only darkness. Somehow we fell asleep on the couch that night. When I woke up, it was bright outside. Emily was still asleep. I looked around and gasped audibly when I saw Philip sitting at the kitchen table. He looked shell-shocked and weary. A million things went through my mind. Was he hurt? When did he get home? Where did he go? Instinctively, the first thing I asked him was, "Did you kill it?" Without looking up to meet my gaze, he shook his head. "No, I didn't hear it in the thicket. It was on its hind legs, trying to intimidate me, but it didn't attack. It just looked at me. I shot it point blank right in the chest," Philip said. He stood up and met my gaze as he walked over, crumpling up a newspaper page as he did. He tossed it at me, and I failed to react, the paper ball harmlessly bouncing off my forehead. "I might as well have done that," he continued. "I got so spooked, I just froze up and waited to die, but it just ran past me off into the thicket," he finished. I shook my head in shock. "I think it's going to get a lot worse around Fallon before it gets better," Philip said, looking at me with sad eyes. Glancing down at the still sleeping Emily, he cleared his throat and spoke again. "I think you should go. Don't tell anybody about this." I nodded and got up to leave. As I opened his front door, Philip spoke again. "It speaks, you know." I laughed nervously, but Philip's words rang true. Over the next year, things got a whole lot worse in Fallon. Every moon cycle, the incidents with the monster increased. It started breaking into barns and was seen all over the region. Fallon was a large area, with farms spread out over vast distances, so the fact that it was being sighted in multiple places in a single night was alarming. The monster was big, strong, and fast, using all its attributes to terrorize us. The town was growing increasingly worried. On top of the supernatural issues, our friend group was suffering. Philip started resenting Mark, which was horrifying to see. Two best friends falling out was the last thing we needed. Philip was angry, saying that if Mark had been with us that night in June, things would have gone differently. Mark was tired of Philip's obsession with the monster, wanting him to realize his actions were irrational and dangerous. Their time together became filled with animosity, and eventually, they stopped wanting to be around each other. 4 years after the incident with Philip, word spread about a town meeting at the bottom of the horseshoe. My family took me down with them, and I saw Mark, Emily, and Philip already there with their families. The families began discussing the ramifications of allowing the monster to continue wreaking havoc in Fallon. They talked about how houses were being stalked now. It was clear the monster was beginning to crave the taste of human flesh. I remember Simon Grant speaking up, his voice grim as he concluded that the monster was getting hungrier. It would stop settling for farm animals soon enough. Eventually, it was decided the monster had to die. A shiver of unease ran through me as I remembered how Philip had failed to rid of it almost a year ago. What hope did we have now? Just as I was about to voice my doubts, Philip spoke up from the back of the crowd. People parted to see him. "We'll kill it," he said. "Me and Mark, the full moon comes in a week, and we all know it lives in the thicket. We'll go in, find it, and kill it." To my horror, everyone agreed. It was settled. Philip and Mark would venture into the thicket to kill the monster. When the day came, I was a bundle of nerves. Something felt wrong, and I knew it would end badly. I was with Mark at my house during the late afternoon, leading up to sunset. As he packed his gear and knives, my fears grew. He looked up at me, eyes heavy with unspoken words. "What is it?" I asked. "Philip, he's going to try to kill me tonight." "What are you talking about?" I felt a shiver run through my body, fear beginning to overcome me. He doesn't talk to me much anymore, and the last time he did, it was hardly friendly. Now he volunteers the both of us to go into the thicket after dark. He blames me for that night. He's been blaming himself while watching the monster terrorize Fallon. He's going to rationalize his fears and try to kill me tonight. Just don't go. Let's talk to him, sit him down, and figure this out. No, we have to be there tonight. Whatever is going to happen will happen. Mark spoke with a voice void of emotion. He looked at me with an empty, resigned stare as he finished packing his guns and left without saying goodbye. I immediately called Emily, and before I knew it, we were on our way to the thicket. Emily had her dad's gun, and our plan was to stop them from solving their problems with violence. The thicket had a path running from the west end to the east, but it was massive, with dense woods surrounding the meager pathway. We entered through the west pathway as the sun was setting, the sky a vibrant purple. The thick canopy of trees and brush limited our vision. Emily looked horrified, jumping at every rustle and movement. I watched the pistol shake in her hands, white-knuckled. I hoped she wouldn't have to use it. The fear was palpable, and even having the gun wasn't helping. I didn't blame her, this was where the monster made its home. I was more worried about Mark and Philip. After minutes of walking, we heard shouting. We picked up our pace, moving from a fast walk to a jog, cutting off the trail to follow the sounds. Soon, we reached a large slope leading to a slight clearing in the thicket. Mark stood defensively, Philip holding his rifle only 10 feet away. They didn't see us, but I realized the gravity of the situation and almost prayed for the monster to show itself. "Shut up, Mark. You wouldn't be in this mess if you hadn't laid that stupid trap. Why couldn't you just leave it alone? No, you had to be the hero because you messed up by leaving the barn open. Don't you see how everything you do just makes things worse? How do you think this will change that trend?" Mark shouted back. Philip's voice lowered, filled with menace. "I'm going to change my mind." The tension was suffocating. My heart raced as I watched the scene unfold, praying for something, anything, to stop this madness. "You're running out of time, Phil." Mark's voice was eerily calm for a man seconds from death. Philip tightened his grip on the gun, raising it higher as he took a step forward. Emily's scream snapped me out of my trance, and in that instant, Philip was startled, firing the gun but missing. Mark's eyes flashed with anger as he darted forward, tackling Philip. Somehow, Philip scrambled to his feet and ran, with Mark chasing him through the woods. Emily and I hurried down the hill, weaving through trees and thick brush, which became increasingly difficult to navigate as the light faded. The last remnants of sunset vanished, replaced by the cold light of the moon. Darkness swallowed the thicket as we rounded the final bend. Panting and breathless, I saw Emily had stopped dead in her tracks. I rested a hand on her shoulder, following her gaze. Mark was nowhere to be seen, but Philip was hunched over on the ground, no longer himself. From a distance, I heard the sickening sounds of bones creaking and shifting. Philip's body twisted and contorted in a grotesque transformation. Silver hair sprouted from his arms and face, spreading by the second. His head morphed, his features warping in a horrifying display. Agonized screams turned to guttural growls as his humanity drained away. The creature that rose from the ground was smaller than the monster we had seen before, its fur lighter, its eyes less yellow. It was both terrible and mesmerizing. It looked at us, Emily's gun trembling in her grasp. The creature's chest heaved, and then it spoke, its words choked and unnatural. "I'm sorry," it rasped, every syllable a struggle. Emily's free hand flew to her mouth, her eyes squeezed shut as she tried to steady the gun. Then, movement behind the new beast caught my eye. In an instant, the original monster sprang from the brush like a predatory jungle cat, its claws sinking into the creature that Philip had become. The larger monster was faster, stronger, and had the element of surprise. It was no contest. I watched in horror as it leaned forward and bit into the other's throat, tearing it out. Philip's monstrous form crumpled to the ground. Emily dropped the gun, hyperventilating as she cried uncontrollably. The sound of the gun hitting the forest floor was the first noise either of us made since the monsters began their horrific battle. As the steel barrel touched the brush at Emily's feet, the monster's gaze shot up to meet mine. In that moment, I made a decision. It might have been good for me at the time, but it haunts me to this day. I ran. I bolted out of the thicket, leaving Emily behind. Her screams haunted me as the monster devoured her, the last sight I ever had of my best friend. The next day, your dad found me. He had gone after Philip, realizing it was a mistake too late. He doubled back, hoping to find us. When I escaped the thicket, he was there, relieved to see me alive. We left the thicket together, your dad consoling me through the trauma. The following days were a blur. Word spread quickly through Fallon's End. Philip and Emily were dead, victims of the monster. We never told anyone Philip had turned into one himself. Regret consumed me. I felt responsible for Emily's death. The town decided the monster's reign of terror had to end. At the next full moon, they planned to burn down the thicket, hoping to trap and destroy it in the blaze. Around the same time I discovered I was pregnant. I couldn't bear the thought of raising a child in Fallon's End, a place soaked in fear and death. 2 days before the full moon, I left. I begged your dad to come with me, but he had fallen ill, likely from bad meat. He promised to join me once he recovered, but he never did. I ended up in Toronto, waiting in vain for him. I sent my final goodbyes, learning later that the town's plan had succeeded. They found the monster's charred body near the eastern edge of the thicket. Fallon's End was finally free. When my mother finished her story, I was horrified yet fascinated. Any questions I asked were dismissed. I never got to meet my dad or his parents. Visits to Fallon's End were forbidden. The memories were too painful for her. But one day, I asked her about the night in the thicket. She was sitting in the living room, a glass of wine in hand after a long day. "Mom," I began, "can I ask you one more question about Fallon's End?" She sighed, reluctant but eventually agreeing. "Go ahead, one question. When the monster looked at you and Emily, how did you get away? It was stronger and faster than anything human. You were deep in the woods. You said Emily was devoured. How did you escape?" She took a deep breath and looked at me. "I told you I ran. I never looked back. That's why I feel so bad." I absorbed her response, letting the subject drop. But now, I watch closely when she says she has to work the night shift, suspecting there might be more to the story than she lets on.